discover it as if for the first time. So now I ask you, when was the last time you opened that book? Not for answers, but for him. Because Pope Francis would want you to know the voice of Jesus still speaks through these pages. And if you listen, it might just change your life. It was a grey morning, quiet, in the way only certain days can be, as if the air itself had slowed to listen. I had arrived earlier than usual that day. Something in my chest told me time was growing thin. He had grown frail, more so than anyone outside his closest circle knew. The man who had stood before crowds of thousands now sat most hours of the day, wrapped in layers, his voice a whisper, but still steady, still clear, still full of light. I found him in his usual chair by the window. A soft breeze moved through the open shutters, lifting the edge of his robe. He was holding his Bible, not reading it, just holding it, as if even in silence it was speaking to him. When he noticed me, he didn't smile the way he used to. He just nodded gently and motioned for me to sit. For a while, we said nothing. That was the kind of friendship we had. Words weren't always needed. But eventually, he broke the silence. "Gabriel," he said, "do you remember the first time we prayed together?" I smiled. Of course I did. It was decades ago, in a side chapel after a long and difficult meeting. We had both been worn down by bureaucracy, exhausted by church politics, and yet, kneeling side by side, all of that had faded. All that remained was two brothers, whispering the name of Jesus into the stillness. He nodded slowly as I reminded him. "That's when I knew," he said. "I knew the only way forward in this life was downward." I wasn't sure what he meant at first, so I asked him. He looked me in the eye, and in that moment, I saw something I'll never forget. Peace. Not the kind that hides pain. The kind that has made peace with pain. The kind that knows what's coming and is ready. He said, "Downward, Gabriel, into humility, into surrender, into the dirt, like a seed." He paused and smiled faintly. "That's where resurrection happens." We sat in silence again. He closed his eyes for a moment, and I thought he might fall asleep. But then he opened them, sharper than before, and said something I'll never forget. "I'm not afraid to die, not because I've done everything right, but because I know the one who will meet me." I didn't know what to say. I just nodded, but he kept going. "You know, people think dying is about closure, about peace and goodbyes, but I don't believe that. I think it's about beginning, real beginning. We've been trying to live faithfully all these years, Gabriel, but we've only been walking in the shadows. The real light is still ahead." He placed the Bible in my hands. His fingers lingered there. "Promise me something," he said. "Don't let them make me a symbol. Don't let them turn my name into something to debate or divide over." "What should I tell them instead?" I asked. He leaned forward as much as his body would allow. "Tell them I tried. Tell them I tried to make Christ the center, that I failed often, but I tried. And tell them he was worth every sacrifice." I felt my throat tighten. The man who had carried so much, who had endured pressure from every side, secular and sacred, was asking me to speak simply, honestly, and I knew I would. He took a deep breath then, the kind you take when you're about to say something important, not to be remembered, but to be obeyed. "When I die," he said, "don't light candles for me." I looked up, unsure what he meant, but he was already finishing the thought. "Light your soul on fire for Christ. That's what I want. That's what the world needs. Not more rituals, not more nostalgia, more burning hearts." He reached for my hand and squeezed it with surprising strength. "Let them bury me quietly. but let them live loudly for him. He asked me to open the Bible and read aloud. I chose Romans 12. Offer your bodies as a living sacrifice. I didn't get far before his eyes welled with tears. He whispered, "That's all I've ever wanted to be." There was something almost childlike about him in those final days. Not childish, but childlike. As if all the complexity of theology, church structure, and global affairs had melted away, leaving only the simple truth that had first called him, Jesus is Lord, and he is enough. He told me that he had dreams sometimes, dreams of walking on water, of standing in fields full of light, of seeing crowds not praising him, but singing one name together, Jesus. It's what I hope heaven sounds like, he said. I asked if he had any regrets. He laughed softly. Plenty, but none of them matter now. The only thing that matters is whether I kept my eyes on him. Our conversation drifted into silence again. I could sense he was tiring. The weight of age, illness, and a life poured out was heavy on him, and yet there was no fear, no hesitation, just readiness. Peace that doesn't come from understanding, but from being known. As I stood to leave, he gripped my arm one last time. Promise me something else, he said. Anything, I replied. Don't let them lose the Gospels. Make them read it again. The whole thing, not just the parts they like. I will, I said. He smiled one last time and said, then I'll see you again, where the sun never sets, and the questions are all answered. That was the last full conversation we had. A few days later, he entered eternity. And when I think about those final words, about lighting our souls on fire instead of candles, I know he wasn't asking for a tribute. He was giving us a mission. And now, it's ours to carry. I didn't expect to say any of this. Truly, I didn't. For a long time, I wrestled with whether I should, whether it was right, whether it would even matter. But in the days after his passing, when the world offered tributes, news anchors filled the airwaves with sound bites, and headlines tried to summarize a man's entire life in 3 sentences, I felt something inside me refuse to be silent. Not for attention, not for fame, but because something holy had been entrusted to me.